Hello, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Lily, Global Policy and Influencing Manager at ILC. I won't be stealing to the show for too long from our excellent panel today. I've just been asked to run through a little bit of housekeeping before we start today. So most of you will be familiar with Zoom by now, but do bear with us if you have any internet issues that could affect sound or video. We're doing everything we can from our side. If for whatever reason you do get disconnected, just use the same link you got to register to join again. So you'll be right connected again. We are also streaming live on YouTube today, so if you do miss the end of the discussion, whatever you can catch up on it later on YouTube. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat function. So if you have any questions to the organisers or anything specific, do put in a question in there if you have any comments to other participants. But we'd ask you to put all your questions in the Q&A tab, which Brendan, our chair, will be going through with our panellists. Do also feel free to post anything on Twitter, so you see the event hashtag there in the bottom of the screen. I think that's about it, and I will hand over to Brendan, who'll be chairing our panel today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. And I'm particularly excited about this report that has been produced by the International Longevity Centre and really headlined by Professor Les Mayhew. If you look at it overall, the future of everyone's future depends on activity, and I think that's a fairly common agreement. Nobody's done research like Les has done on this subject before. I think some of the findings are terrific, and the level of research and the level of detail that's come from Les and his team is magnificent. I think this report is a curtain raiser for a whole series of studies, and I'm sure the panel, the distinguished panel we have to get today, are going to explore it further, but also agree it's the opening of a lot of other activities and a lot of other studies and a lot of very important research, which literally, we're talking about living a longer, healthier life, and that is what life's about, really. So let's just quickly introduce the panel. We'll be hearing from them all, and it's a distinguished panel, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce Professor Les Mayhew, the head of global research at the International Longevity Centre and Professor of Statistics at the Business School at the University of London. Les joined ILC in October 2020 as head of global research and is working on a range of research projects as well as enhancing the ILC's research approach and strategy. He's a part-time professor of statistics at the Business School, and when you read his report, you'll understand that his qualification there is exemplary. He's the managing director of Mayhew Harper Associates, and I'm really looking forward to listening to Les on this excellent report that he's produced. Also, Alan Smith, former professional footballer for Arsenal in England, and I was literally just speaking the other day to Mo Farah, who tells me that Alan Smith, in his days at Arsenal, was one of his heroes. So Alan will be pleased to hear that, because Mo Farah was one of the greatest. So Alan won 2 league titles, an FA Cup, League Cup, and scored the only goal in the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1994. He's far too young to be on a panel like this. He won 2 golden boots, and he was the division's top scorer, winning 13 England caps. One of my all-time favourite sportsmen and sportswomen of all time, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson. Tanni has been the pioneer of Paralympian sport, and she's battled through it. She's put herself in a position, and now Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson is a crossbench peer and legendary Paralympian wheelchair racer, one of the most successful British athletes of all time. Over an international career spanning 19 years, she won 11 Paralympic gold medals, held over 30 world records, and won the London Marathon 36 times. Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson was appointed UK Active Chair in 2015, turning her seasoned campaigning voice to the crucial issue of turning the tide of physical inactivity. And I know personally that Tanni has really believed in what she does and always has done. And Tanni is a great example for all of us. Scott Reed, Global Protection Analytics Actuary at Zurich Insurance Company. Scott works for the Zurich company as Global Protection Analytics Actuary, and it's a global role where he advises on the pricing and design of new health and life insurance products, a hugely important area in the future. Part of Scott's role is to develop health products using technology to improve people's health and well-being, and that is, to my mind, the beginning of a whole new territory for all of us. Joining him, Professor Chris Brady, the Chief Intelligence Officer at Sportsology, a former Professor of Management Studies at Salford University. Chris is currently in that position at Sportsology and has worked on a variety of activities, ranging from a line worker at Chrysler in Detroit in his teens to managing a bookmaker's shop, from a land surveyor to a semi-professional footballer, from a naval officer to a management consultant, and now going to spread his knowledge to all of us in this whole new area. Andy Moore is the National Partnerships Lead at Health and Inactivity at Sport England, and that is the future of Sport England's role, I'm pretty sure. He leads the team at Sport England in order to look at us in maintaining an active life as we get older, and he's passionate about fostering collaboration across sport, physical activity, health and well-being, and staying active as we age. So I think we've got a terrific panel, and it is my pleasure, before we hear the bulk of the report from Professor Les, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce one of my heroes in sport. That's Baroness Tanni Gray-Thompson, known to me as Tanni.
Thank you, Bren. That's really lovely. Yeah, Tanni, that's good. I was smiling when you were talking about the London Marathon, because as an athlete, it was like amazing to have you commentate on my races. And then at one point I got to sit next to you in the commentary box. And I have to say, when I turned up for one of my first commentaries, I forgot highlight pens. And Brian was the first person who stepped his highlighter pen. So thank you for that. I know it sounds small, but it's massive. So thank you. I'm also really delighted with the launch of this report on the longevity of sporting legends. And actually now, I mean, for me, it's more important than ever, because when I was a young athlete, I used to think 50 was like really old. And obviously I've now, as I've hit that age, but it's a really, really important issue that we talk about how we protect and look after and support older people in society in so many different ways. But we do know that older adults are less active than younger adults. And we have to do something to sort of turn the tide of that. For me, activity was massively important when I was young, and then I got diverted into elite sport, and then now I'm back trying to be active. And we know that physical activity and sport is good for you, but we need to have those conversations in terms of decision makers. We have lots of data out there, but I think this report contributes to the case that we need to make, because active aging is going to be one of the things that has a big impact on the NHS. Physical activity supports many sort of important elements of healthy aging, including good physical function, mental function, sleep, opportunities for social interaction, and reduced loneliness. And I know on a personal level, physical activity has made a huge impact on me in lockdown. We talk about working from home. Actually, what we're doing is we're living at work, and physical activity has kind of made this massive difference. Of course, studies have revealed, we know that physical activity is also, associated with reduced risk of severe COVID-19 symptoms, such as hospitalization, admission to intensive care, and obviously death. So it feels like a really, really important time that we're talking about this work. And I know in my history as a Paralympian, when the Paralympics started, if you broke your back or your neck, your life expectancy was between 2 and 7 years, and it was much more at the lower end. And when Sir Ludwig Guttmann started the movement, there were many reasons for it, but one of them was, up until that point, if you broke your back or your neck, you were left in hospital to die. And with the Second World War, there weren't enough bed spaces to allow that to happen. And he very quickly recognised the link between sport and physical activity and actually rehabilitation. So the work he did was incredible. And my first sports club I joined at 16, the chairman of the club was a quadriplegic. He was told that he would not live 20 years beyond his accident. But actually, he lived 40 plus sport and physical activity. And again, with my personal concern, I was born with spina bifida. And one of the things that is really common with people with spina bifida is urinary tract infections. Every year I go and visit my urologist. He asks me when my last UTI was. And I say it was when I was 13 years old, which is incredibly unusual. but that is because of physical activity. So in retirement from sports, sadly not quite retirement yet, but I'm really privileged to chair UK Active, and UK Active has really similar ambitions to just get people to understand the power of physical activity and to increase longevity. What we know from the work that we've done is that people are hitting frailty in their 40s, and the impact that that's on lives. People don't need to be getting to frailty to that point until their 80s and 90s. And if you hit frailty at 40, you know, it's not a great life for the life that you have left. So along with lots of other things we're doing in terms of getting young people and working with schools and women and disabled people, the active aging agenda is really important for us. And we're doing a lot of work in terms of promoting to our industry about how to look at programs and classes and look at the level that people are currently at and ability or intensity, not just looking at age specific offerings. That's kind of to keep reducing the health inequalities across the country and ease pressure on the social care system. And one thing I do know with my parliamentary hat on is social care is going to be a really, really big subject for us in the next few years. So what I absolutely believe is that if we all work together and we talk really publicly about these issues, we have to join up the different government departments. We have to get them to listen to us. And we have to make sure that older people get the opportunities they want and deserve to live a long and healthy life. So thank you very much to the ILC for doing this work. In a personal capacity and as chair of UK Active, we're really excited about working with you and to see what we can do to make sure that this message keeps getting, you know, really strongly promoted. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Tani. That is, as always from you, that is inspirational. And when I heard your point about age being forecasted 2 to 7 years if you broke your back, I think that's a really telling point. And now you're talking about activity being encouraged in 50-year-olds and beyond. It just shows us how far you've come, how far you've led your particular area, and we're delighted that you've been involved today. And I think the International Longevity Centre will be delighted to hear that you're prepared and happy and looking forward to working with them. So thanks again, Tani. So now the main bulk of the report from Professor Les Mayhew, the Head of Global Research at the International Longevity Centre, and also the Professor of Statistics at the Business School, formerly Cass City at the University of London. Les has done an awful lot of really outstanding work in this area, and listening to very early engagement from Tani, and also from the way the press have engaged with the idea of taking part in sport, extending your life. I think this is good work already, Les, and we're looking forward to hearing the bulk of your report now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Les.
Thank you very much. Next slide. Okay, just a couple of words about ILC, in case you don't know. We're the UK specialist think tank on the impact of longevity on society and what happens next. And you can see from this map of the globe that we're not just based in the UK, we have an alliance that stretches across most continents. So we look forward to this event today and to the discussion later. So next slide. Okay, just to get on with the report, Brendan has done an excellent introduction and Tani is a brilliant curtain raiser. I hope I can live up to it. As was said, this is a joint project between ILC and my business school, formerly known as Cass, to whom I'm very grateful for their support and encouragement. You may notice from your screen that you can't see me. Nothing to be missed, really. If you think of me as a sort of take the average of Brendan and Chris and then add 10 years, you've probably got something, you know, fairly identifiable. But I'm very sorry about that. It's due to getting a new computer today and not really clicking all the right buttons. But anyway, you can hear me, which is the main thing, and you can see my slides. So, as I said, I work in an actuarial faculty as well in the business school, and actuaries are widely employed, as you know, in the pension and life insurance industries, being among the biggest users. There is a saying that actuaries like people to be dead on time, and in a sense, this is what this research is all about. Does sport extend your time and your longevity? Anyway, well, I'd like to welcome our distinguished discussants, and I'm looking forward to their views on the topic, which speaks to their sport, but in a way they've probably not reflected on until now. Now, there is huge interest in longevity today. People can spend fortunes on finding the secret of a long life. There are pharmaceutical companies out there, like Calico, for example, investing billions in developing drugs that prolong life. But it seems to me that sport is much cheaper and much closer to home, but does it do a better job? Well, I hope to show that it does. It does a considerably better job. Next slide, please. Now, my aim is to look at longevity through the perspective of elite sport and if it gives you a boost. The subtext is that there is a longevity dividend waiting to be claimed if people spent more time engaging in sport and physical exercise. Whilst many of the health benefits are well known, it's also good for confidence building and mental health. The list goes on. However, less well known is whether a long-term commitment to sport also boosts longevity, and this is the gap I aim to fill. But we are also interested in how much longevity depends on other factors, like social class, education, or selection factors. Not everybody may be physically suited, for example. Next slide. So why focus on elite sports people, those who are at the top of their game? Well, there are several reasons why elites are interesting. The key one is that sport is a huge industry and sporting success creates role models for adoring fans around the world. So the behaviors of a few can influence the lives of millions of others in different ways. Now, because sporting careers are relatively short, most of the elites that I've looked at finished, or their career is over by about the age of 40. We know little about their later years. For example, whether they are healthy years. This could be a selling point or a warning, especially if they end up dying fairly young. The risks and rewards have changed down the years. Have they created an environment in which sports have become more dangerous or less dangerous? Again, looking at patterns down the years is informative. Now, the final point, and a very practical point, is that we have a fantastic historical record to draw upon. If we were starting from scratch, we would not be able to look at trends or turning points and learn from the past. All the sports we considered were established or codified in the UK in the 19th century or earlier. They are, if you like, the UK's gift to the world. Because elites are few in number, won't it be hard, you might say, to prove anything that stands up statistically? Well, that turns out not to be the case, because one of the achievements, I think, of this research is that it works well with relatively small samples of people. It means that I can look at the experiences of a few and compare them with the experiences of the many, in this case, the entire population. Next slide. Our approach must reflect the small numbers, therefore, of sporting elites whose lives are spread over 180 years or so, since comprehensive mortality data became available in the UK. Now, life expectancy has increased massively in that time. A male aged 20 in 1870 could expect a lifespan of about 63 years. If born in 1970, it would be 86 years. So the methodology is designed with that in mind, and there are two cases to consider. The first is people that have already died and their ages of death. The second is those alive today who have made their mark in their chosen sport and so could be of any age. Are their ages somehow exceptional compared with the average person? Take the first case. This is like looking in the rearview mirror. Somebody that died a while ago would have been in their sporting prime several decades back. Given the huge increases in life expectancies, their ages of death may not be representative of the more recently deceased. So, for example, a person dying at age 65 in 1925 might be considered old, but not if compared with someone dying at the same age in 2005. So we therefore base our analysis on their actual age of death with the age of death of an average male born in the same year. Now, this doesn't capture all those who are still alive today and may be living to exceptionally high ages. For example, we find quite a few tennis players in their 90s. Indeed, 55 of the 110 players in our sample, i.e. 50%, who were ever Wimbledon finalists were still alive in 2020. Next slide. Our 7 sports and the selection criteria seen in this slide. In total, our sample is based on 752 lives, of which 312 are dead. They are football, cricket, rugby union, tennis, golf, boxing and horse racing, specifically Derby winning jockeys. Typically, you get a new team captain every couple of years and a championship winner every year if the event is annual. But some champions, of course, are multiple winners, boxing and tennis being 2 examples of that case. The sample would therefore be smaller if we counted Wimbledon winners or British heavyweight champions only once. I therefore expanded the tennis criteria to include both Wimbledon finalists, and for boxing, I included other heavyweight divisions, such as light heavyweight. Because I was concerned that the differences in results might be outliers, I also did further checks. For example, I compared Welsh rugby and Scottish football captains with their English equivalent. I found no statistical difference and so concluded that it was the sport that was important and not the country of birth. Finally, except for tennis and golf, there is no equivalent record for women going back in time. Although I did some early analysis on women tennis players, it's not included here because it would take us too far off piste today, but I have it in mind to visit this again in the future. Next slide. So the next few slides will feature some charts showing how the analysis works out in practice with some examples and what my findings are. There are 2 parts. First, the backward look at deceased sporting legends and whether their ages of death are exceptional or not compared with the general population. The second compares the number alive in any given year from 1900 to 2020, and if that is higher than one would expect based on the general male population. In both cases, we need a metric or a decision rule to decide whether there is a statistical difference or not between the sport concerned and the general population. The standard approach in statistics is to test whether the observed ages of death differ significantly from the expected. So for this, we use basic statistical concepts and methods which you learn in your first year at university. Take the first case. If the observed difference in deaths has a 5% or less probability of occurrence, we accept that athletes live longer or shorter than the general male population, depending on the direction of difference. Similarly, in the second case, if the ratio of the observed to expected survivors at any year differs significantly from 1, then the athletes are living longer or shorter lives than expected, using the same decision rule. So, for example, if 50 were alive and we only observe 40 alive in the general population, this would be a longevity advantage of 20%. Next slide, please. So back to the first case. Because life expectancy has increased so much, it would be unfair to directly compare the lives of people that were born decades apart. This chart shows the age of death for different percentiles of population starting in 1840. The first 10%, then the next 25, 50, 75, and 95%, up to the 99th percentile, which is the line at the very top. This is only ever reached by the oldest old. The line slopes upwards from left to right because life expectancy is improving over time. But you'll notice that the lines also gradually bunch together, and this is because ages of death have become more compressed over time. That is to say, we're tending to die in a narrowing age window. Next slide. So, to illustrate the point, take a person X born in 18 60 and dying at age 65 in 1925. He is above the 50th percentile and therefore lived longer than the typical male born in the same year. On the other hand, person Y, born in 1940, also dies at 65. This time he is just above the 25th percentile in the year 2005. He would be considered unfortunate to have died so young. The key point is that the longevity goalposts keep moving, and this needs to be taken on board when comparing people in sports. We therefore compare the ages of death, not with the absolute ages of death, but with the percentile in which they died, using the general male population as our reference point. Next slide. So, what does this look like in practice? This chart is the same as the previous slide, but I now overlay the deaths of Wimbledon finalists. Each point is a person. There are 55 on the chart, starting from the first tournament in 1871. Looking at the younger of the deceased first, the chart shows that 3, that is 5% of all finalists, died below the 10th percentile. One of whom you may remember was Arthur Ashe, indicated, and the other was a gentleman called Chuck McKinley. But most of the others died at much older ages. At the higher percentiles, the number of points, the number of dots you see, are much more crowded. For example, there are 3 deaths in the 99th percentile. One of these is Sidney Wood, who won the title in 1931. Born in 1911, he died aged 98 in 2009. Note there have been no deaths of any finalists born after 1943, the last being Arthur Ashe. Now, does this pattern show unusual signs of longevity? Well, yes, very much so. Next slide. We can represent the same information in this way. The vertical axis is the cumulative percentage of deaths, and the horizontal axis is the percentile in which the deaths occurred. The black line is the general population, and the columns are tennis players. The gap between the columns and the black line shows that there were more deaths in the general population in each percentile than in the general male population. Slide. This gap is highlighted here in red. Further analysis shows that the probability of such a gap occurring by chance is very, very small. For example, the probability of such a percentage surviving to beyond male median age is only 5 in 100, and to the 99th percentile, only 1 in 1,000. I agree this is quite a lot to take in, so I also calculate an aggregate figure which shows the longevity of tennis stars expressed as a single percentage. It shows that the average longevity is 13% above the England and Wales male average for those that are deceased. When I repeat this for other sports and summarize the information more succinctly, I get this chart. Next slide. These are the rankings that you get. The yellow, oh, it's now green. The green bar at the top is the general male population, and this is our benchmark and set equal to 1. The blue bars show each sport relative to the general male population. So a value of 1.1, for example, means longevity is 10% higher. A value of 0.9 means that it's 10% lower. So of the 7 sports we've considered, 5 are above the male average and 2, boxing and horse racing, are below the average. Of the 3 team sports, rugby and cricket do about 10% better than average and better than football, which happens to be about the same as the general male population. Tennis and golf do better than all the team sports, in which their longevity is 12% to 13% higher than the general male population. You'll see that both jockeys and boxers do worse, mortality 12% and 25% greater, or longevity 12% and 25% less respectively. We return to some of the reasons for this later, but the big factor in boxing and horse racing is the safety angle. Having said that, it's intriguing that 4 of the sports consistently deliver higher statistically significant outcomes, and one of these, football, is no different from the average, and 2 are below the average. Let's park that result for a moment and turn to the second part of the analysis, which is concerned with the numbers alive today. Next slide, please. So this chart shows whether the number of live alive in any year is exceptional compared with the number of alive in the general male population. Again, this is for tennis. When the ratio equals 1, there is no difference, i.e. it tracks the black line going through the middle of the chart. Higher than 1, survival or longevity is greater than expected, and if lower than 1, is less than expected. Again, subject to our decision rule on statistical significance. Again, we can do this for each sport. It begins in 1900 and runs to 2020. So if you start with the pattern to 1960 in this chart, the halfway point, the pattern to that point hardly deviates from 1, and it's almost identical to the general male population. Tennis players no different from everybody else. After 1960, it climbs steadily until in 2020, it's 36% above average. That is, there are 36% more finalists alive than one would have expected. Between 1960 and 2020, the advantage averages out at 15%, which is still very impressive. Now, one possible reason when you look at this in detail is that 1960 marked the start of the open era in tennis when professionals were admitted. Now, this seems to be a very plausible explanation for the change seen because it signifies a step up in fitness, stamina, and training, in my view. Next slide. Okay, let's now compare boxing with tennis. Boxing has a very checkered history using this metric. It was slightly above 1 until 1960, slipping back in 1970 and again in 2010. Today, it's about 7% below the male average. Of course, you might say it's not surprising because boxing is the only sport in which participants deliberately set out to hurt each other, at least within the rules of the sport. Indeed, you might expect that boxing should be more harmful than this chart appears to show. In the earlier years, for example, bouts were longer, bare knuckle, and there were more of them. The dip in 1970 actually reflects the toll on fighters that were at their peaks in the 1940s and 50s. But the drop-off in 2010 is probably also worth closer scrutiny. I've yet to look at that in detail. Next slide, please. Here, I'm comparing tennis with football. Pre-war football appears to have been a different game, at least in the 1930s, with an advantage peaking at plus 30%. Now, this may have something to do with the old amateur ideals of that time and before professionalization really took hold. I don't know, worthy of some discussion. But then it declined below 1 in 1970 before hovering just above 1 and then finally ending up 2% above parity in 2020. Now, the drop in the 1970 probably results from playing many more matches and the professionalization of the game, more money flowing into the game. I don't know exactly. But the research, I should also add, doesn't prove a link between early deaths and dementia, which is a very topical subject currently. However, the results are consistent of the pattern that we're seeing today, consistent with poor playing conditions, such as muddier pitches and the heading of waterlogged balls over those decades. As with the first part of the methodology, we also try to summarize the results in a single statistic based on an overall survival advantage. Next slide, please. So this chart shows the average between 1960 and 2020 for each sport. And it's surprisingly consistent in many ways with the first part of the methodology. The male average is the yellow column and has a value of 1. If sporting value is 1.1, it means the sport has a 10% survival advantage. Now, the average on this chart varies between 9% and 15% in the cases of golf, cricket, rugby, and tennis. Football is 3%, derby jockey is 2%, and boxing is minus 3%. So again, boxing has a slight disadvantage. So cricket, rugby, and tennis and horse racing, we find, are all improved relative to how they were pre-1960. Golf has maintained the same advantage, whereas football and boxing have slightly deteriorated. However, it can be argued that the statistic that really matters is the latest value of the ratio pertaining to 2020. It doesn't show you a trend, but it paints the current picture. So when we do this, tennis is out in front at 36%, followed by rugby 16%, cricket 14%, and then golf 9%. Next slide. So just to summarize, overall the results show considerable consistency, suggesting that variations are not random, but are an artifact of the sport and those in the sport. But I would emphasize these points. There is, it seems, a clear pecking order with only minor adjustments in the rankings over time. Team sports do well, but not as well as individual sports like golf and tennis, which are open to all comers. While some sports have improved, others like football have bumped along the bottom or dipped like boxing. Horse racing has benefited from safety improvements and is performing much better today than only just above benchmark. Next slide. So what about external factors, factors that are not intrinsic to the sport themselves? Well, a lot of people following this research will be interested in whether there are underlying factors that explain these results. In other words, it's not just the nature and physicality of the sport, but something to do with the background of the sporting legends. As I said earlier, few go beyond the age of 40. Odd exceptions include jockeys like Lester Pickett, the occasional cricket captain, or golfers. But what does the analysis tell us about post-retirement? For example, if the later years are healthy and successful or fraught with difficulty and hardship. Now, it's really quite difficult to find this out from the information that you can locate online. I did a lot of background reading, and one of the good things about the elites is you tend to get very good biographies of them, and this can be very informative, although it does contain some gaps. Because we focus on legends, you're more likely to find something interesting, in other words. So this chart identifies the main themes that popped up. Several won't come as a surprise. These include injury risk, which we've talked about, but also educational attainment, socioeconomic background, leadership qualities, and selection effects. This table plots each factor against every sport. A tick indicates a factor is more likely to apply, and a cross less likely to apply. Because nothing is static, I added a final column which shows net tendency in longevity change since 1960 over 1900 in relation to each sport. So, for example, if you play rugby or cricket at a high level, you're more likely to come from a higher socioeconomic group who tend to live longer anyway. But there are nuances. For example, as I said earlier, Welsh rugby captains are equal with English rugby captains in the longevity stakes. So is it educational attainment that's more important? Probably that's the case. The professionalisation of rugby has altered the pool of players too. How will that affect longevity going forward? Well, we don't really know that yet because they are still quite young in the longevity stakes. Cricket has been more conservative in this regard, but it also has improved slightly. Conversely, if we take football, this is more likely to be played by lower socioeconomic groups from a range of backgrounds. Educational attainment also may be lower. Today, you see in football more overseas players who are attracted by the money. So is the link to longevity still with social class and education? I would say probably yes. Golf appears to be the least changed amongst the sports. It's always been open to all comers, but players need to be fairly rich or professional. Parental support is common because of the high entry costs, so it suggests that they come from more well-to-do backgrounds. There's some evidence that it may have dropped a little, but nothing statistically remarkable, with longevity rankings hardly changed. When you can examine the longevity differences between boxing and other sports, injury stands out, but selection into a boxing career has more to do with social class. Boxing in schools disappeared decades ago and was largely amateur anyway, so this has completely narrowed the field and the people that participate. Longevity may also be due to physical or mental attributes, which combine success on the field of play with success in other careers. So I tend to bracket these effects with leadership qualities. It's a characteristic you see on the field of play, but also in politics and business fields. In the case of sporting legends, many go on to have successful careers, but I've not done a comprehensive audit, though this would be possible and could be a next step in this research. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure you have further stories and opinions. So next slide, please. So what do I conclude? Well, I think the research shows clearly that sport matters and is good for physical health and longevity on the whole. Sport brings happiness and joy to millions and is good for mental as well as physical health. Sport is a good vehicle for getting public health messages across to specific audiences. In some cases, I would say better than official channels. The methodology applies a basis for working with other sports and sporting associations, as we've done here, but I'm also confident that it can be used in more in-depth, serious investigations as required. For example, the link between long-term injury and longevity in health. So in conclusion, I'd just make some further examples of work. Next slide, please. You may say, well, where does this go to next? Well, all fairly obvious ideas, I would say, and subject to data availability. But I do think there's a good scope to focus on newer sports. Whilst we don't have the same depth of mortality record, we can certainly look at survival. A wide range come to mind, including some riskier ones like downhill skiing or F1, but others like athletics, field and track, squash, or more sedentary sports, darts even come to mind. We clearly have a gap in the analysis with women, ethnic minorities and para-athletes. These can also be rectified using this approach if we work with the right organisations. And then finally, there's a range of specific issues that are worthy of attention. I just list three there: risk versus reward, the issue about long-term injury and its long-term effects on longevity, and health in later years. So thanks very much for listening, and back to you, Brendan. I need to unmute.
Thank you very much indeed, Les. That's a fascinating study. Obviously raises some real issues, but also raises some serious questions and also opens up a corridor of opportunities and things that must be studied, because when you talk about extending an active, healthy life, that is a question which should be on everybody's agenda. And I'm sure you've pointed in the direction where this study should go. My only question would be, you've studied elite sportsmen. Does this extend into ordinary people, into the mass participation side of sport? And that is a question which I'm sure we'll run through the rest of the afternoon. So thank you, Les. And now we'd be very interested to hear from former Arsenal and England footballer, Alan Smith.
Thanks, Brendan, and thank you, Les, for that report. I mean, the bad news, I suppose, is that football doesn't fare too well in this report. All those years of running about, all that sweat and pain, thinking that it would stand us in good stead in later life. You know, maybe it wouldn't. And I mean, I'm not sure about the reasons for that. As you know, I think what Les said, he wasn't altogether sure why that would be. And particularly the interesting part, I thought, was before the war, when footballers lived longer. You'd have thought maybe it was the other way around, with them being not as fit as those in later years. But I mean, I don't know whether I'm surprised or not by the findings. I know players, after their careers have finished, who have maybe just let themselves go a little bit. They've put on weight. They've had 20 years of discipline and minding what you eat, and then all of a sudden they feel they can let themselves go, and you know, they start eating the wrong foods and everything, and their attitude to life maybe isn't as positive as some others may be. On the flip side, you know, there's plenty of ex-teammates of mine that keep themselves extremely fit, whether it's getting into cycling or doing other stuff. You know, they look in good a shape as they did when they were playing. I mean, I think what helps with footballers and what helps with sports people in general, I think, after their careers is that discipline that you've had to have as a sports person. It's been ingrained from a young age, and you've had to find that will to push yourself to make sacrifices, and that stays with you, I think, to a certain extent. In some people more than others, it stayed with me. That discipline, it might wane a little bit at times, but it's certainly a part of you, I think, because that's what got you where you did arrive at in sport. There's also maybe a little bit of vanity involved, isn't there? You don't want to let yourself go. You want to keep that body that you always had when you were playing sport, which isn't easy. But I think what doesn't help footballers, and I don't know whether this differs considerably from other sports. I mean, it's the psychological side. Footballers are generally known little else. They've got into the sport at a young age. Quite often they've joined a club at 16, left school as soon as possible, and when it all does come to an end, of course, it's like falling off a cliff, and they're just thinking, what the heck do I do now? And they're ill-equipped to really go in another direction. I mean, from my own experience, I retired at 32, which was a bit younger than I would have wanted to. I had a knee injury, and the actual day that the surgeon told me that was devastating enough. But then you go in to say goodbye to your teammates, and you walk away that day and you've lost 20, 25 good friends, people that you would see every single day or most of your lives, having a laugh and a joke with, having a close bond with, and all of a sudden you're cut off from that. And, you know, that is hard to take. And I know a lot of players have found it impossible to deal with. And I found it difficult. There's no question about that. What I think helped me was my education. I was a little unusual in that I stayed on at school. I did my A-levels. I went to Polytechnic, as it was then, Coventry Poly, although I left after a year to join Leicester. But that education certainly helped me afterwards, because I got into writing columns for newspapers, and the work I do for Sky. I think a good education helps in terms of the words that you use. So that's been an advantage for me, without question. For many lads, they haven't got that, and there's a bit of a downward spiral, and they're searching for direction, and quite often they don't find it, and perhaps that leads to shorter lifespans. I don't know. What I think certainly does lead to shorter lifespans is the issue of dementia. Heading in football, which, as Les said, is in the news at the moment. I'm taking part in one of the many researches that are going on at the moment to try and establish a link, if there is any link, between football, heading a ball, and brain injury. I mean, you only have to look at the England 1966 World Cup winning team to kind of establish a link. The number that have suffered from dementia, I think, is way over the national average. So that certainly tells us something. Yes, they played with heavier balls then. Whether that does make a difference compared to the lighter ones that I headed over 13 years. I was known for my heading, actually, and you know, we do plenty of drills in training that would go on for quite a while. And I think that culture's changing now. Coaches are looking at that. As school kids or kids under a certain age aren't heading the ball in training now. And I think that's kind of moving in the right direction. You wouldn't want to see heading go out of football totally, but as more and more research gets done, I think, you know, that link will become stronger, and there'll be some proof there. I remember looking at a film called Concussion with Will Smith when it was all about the NFL, and there were some players that took the NFL to court trying to establish this link, and the NFL fought it for many years. And although the players over there, of course, wear helmets, but it was found not to really matter, because once you get clattered, your brain inside your skull is shaking about, and as a result, the helmet doesn't offer too much protection. I mean, as for helping footballers post-career, perhaps there is more that can be done. The Players' Union, the PFA, do offer subsidised courses in all sorts of areas, re-education courses to try and set their members on another path. I did a feature writing course, actually, which was subsidised by the PFA, which I didn't actually finish in the end, but these options are available to people. I mean, from the financial aspect, the lads that are playing today and over the last 10, 15 years, they aren't going to have to worry too much about bringing money into the household, as it were. I did. But I still think there's more to it than that, isn't there? If they can't find a purpose in life, they're going to struggle, I think, from a mental health aspect. It's very difficult having been adored and having been so focused, having done something that you've loved since you've been able to stand up and kick a ball, for that to be taken away, and then for not to be able to concentrate on something else, I think is very difficult. Yeah, and I think maybe footballers do perhaps find it difficult to move on to other things than other sports people, and Les mentioned it, the difference in educational backgrounds, and that might be a big reason. But I'd just like to finish it on a rather sad note, really, bit of a depressing one. My old teammate Tony Adams, who's done some fantastic work with his Sporting Chance charity, which offers therapy and help to those suffering with addictions. He's done it for a number of years, and so many people have gained from that. But the other day, he issued a statement to just say, and I'll read it, I'll quote it. He says, in January 2021, the number of professional footballers referred for gambling addiction overtook alcohol and other drug addiction referrals for the first time. So we've known about this problem with alcohol. There was a culture in my day. I mean, Tony was a reformed alcoholic, if you could say reformed. Alcoholics say that an alcoholic until the day they die. So Paul Merson was another one. But I think gambling is the new disease of our generation, not just in sports, but people across the board. And maybe the fact that people like the Sporting Chance are taking in more and more footballers with these kind of problems, that's telling indications of the problems perhaps in my industry, and also maybe a factor in the findings of the report that reveal footballers don't live longer than the general public. Hopefully, as years go on, that will change. But as things stand, I think there's a lot that we can in football do to maybe increase that longevity in their lives, and hopefully that will happen in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. That's a fantastic insight into the glory game. The purpose of life beyond the glory years. Everyone can imagine that is a challenge. When you talk about football and dementia, that is also obviously a topic. And then when you talk about the mental health side of it and the purpose for life, I think you've explored and opened up a really fascinating area. And I think when you put it in perspective, you've got football just the same level as the average public, and yet we all know how important football is, how significant it is, and I think you've opened up a whole area of discussion, and it would be really interesting to explore that whole thing on its own, let alone within the statistical, because you're talking about human behaviour rather than statistical behaviour. So I think that was terrific, Alan. Thank you so much indeed for that.
Pleasure.
So if we can move on from Alan to Scott Reed, the Global Protection and Analytics Actuary at Zurich Insurance Company, and Scott's role in developing health products using technology to improve people's health and well-being is at the modern end of sport and activity in sport, and how sport can be the motivation to take part in sport can be helpful in life. So can we now hear from Scott Reed? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brendan. Yeah, I just want to say this is a very interesting paper, and it's a key area of research, really to understand the impact of fitness in sports in terms of longevity. So if we understand that, that would be a really valuable thing to do. And I think Les Mayhew's paper, does address that. There's a gap in research in that area. It's a key topic also from the insurance industry point of view in terms of preventing early death, illness, but also in terms of managing chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes. I think that there is quite a lot of evidence out there in terms of the importance of diet and exercise for longevity. But this paper to me provides a really good illustration based on elite sports people over a long duration of time. One of the things I want to look into now is just the findings of the papers in terms of the link between sports and longevity. The key finding in the paper is really that participation in elite sports is generally favourable for lifespan longevity. However, if you drill down into a bit more detail, as we've discussed, before within up to now, is that some sports are good for your longevity and some are not. And I think the paper provides some interesting insights. So we've already covered the fact that cricket, rugby, tennis, golf are very good for your longevity. Unsurprisingly, horse racing and boxing do less well. But actually, I was a bit surprised on football, though. I have to admit, when I compare football against rugby, it was a bit of a surprise to me that football wasn't better for you. And I think for me, I'd like to understand why that is in a bit more detail. I think this is really sort of an area for future research. And I was really interested to hear what Alan Smith had to say around all the different factors there. So to me, this is not, it's not completely obvious why rugby and football are so different. The next thing is that I think the paper also raises a lot of quite sort of key sort of questions. So I think it's been made in the paper, and I think people have discussed it about the link between sports and head injuries. And I think perhaps that's a reason that football does less well compared to rugby. But there's also a whole lot of other factors that come into it. And I think ideally you would like to sort of model all these different influencing external factors. However, in order to do that, you need a really much bigger comprehensive data set over a long duration of time, which is a challenge. I think from sort of next steps perspective, I think it'd be good to understand the implications of other sporting activities that have high participation, backed by the general public, and that's things like running. That's something that I'm very interested in, and cycling. And I think it's also important to do this at the professional and amateur level as well. And another thing I think would be quite good to look into is the sort of more extreme end of endurance sports like marathon running, ultra running, triathlons, rowing, to name just a few examples, because there is lots of conflicting studies on this, is that if this is sort of this U-shaped association with health and longevity, if you do too much running, it'll impact your health and so on. I think that's a sort of a key area of interest for me. And also so I think just in general, just it'd be extremely interesting to extend this research, as Professor Mayhew's alluded to. I want to just touch on the sort of novelty of approach and methodology in the paper. To me, it's sort of remarkable that small samples of of data give such useful insights into longevity. I think that's something that I think is quite novel. I think the research into assessing living sports people survivorship level is novel to me, and in my view, I think it would be useful. This could have actually have quite useful applications because it's using much more recent data, and I think that's an area that could be quite useful applications for longevity over sort of shorter time spans. I think also the way Professor Mayhew has done the sort of percentiles across the age of death is an interesting method as well. And I think also that's really good about the approach. I think it's understandable, it's a straightforward approach, and I think it makes it much more accessible. So just moving on to the question about, this has been touched on before, about what does this mean for the role of exercise more broadly in terms of an ageing population. And I think this is another area that was picked up in the paper that's really interesting. Sports that do really well as tennis and golf are sociable. They can be played into an older age, and it also involves a lot of hand-eye coordination, which I think might be sort of very beneficial to longevity as well. And I think this is a sort of an area I think that merits further research. Just to finish on, I think just a final question that I want to have a look at is just how can sports be better supported? And I think today, there's lots of sort of mass participant events, which I think are fantastic. I mean, I'm planning to run the Manchester Marathon later this year, and I think the parkrun events are fantastic. These sort of mass participation events are really great things, and it really encourages people to do more exercise. I also think insurers have a role to play here in providing incentives to measure activity and reward your customers for better outcomes. I think if customers have got a financial incentive, that can help nudge the right behaviour. So I think insurers have got quite an important role here as well. And also insurers can provide information and education to customers alongside sort of public health bodies. And just to finish on, I think there's an opportunity here to improve sports participation at younger ages. I think this is a really key thing in terms of what we need to do as a society, basically help younger people develop really good habits for later life. So on that, I'll finish there and pass back to Brendan.
Thank you very much indeed, Scott. That was an interesting view from an actuary's position. I think your analysis of Professor Les's study is an interesting one. The interesting thing for me is he studied elite sports people, and it seems to me that the gap is what happens to the elite sports people after they've finished their competitive life. But also, we at the Great North Run have 40 years of data, which we literally deal with general mass participation. I don't think anybody's ever studied it. I don't think anybody's even ever asked us to provide it. But if you want to talk about how this study applies to ordinary people who do extraordinary things like run marathons and half marathons, I'm sure there's a door that can open to there. But I think your analysis is spot on, and I think the future studies here actually are part of what's important about today's talk. So thank you very much indeed, Scott, for your analysis. I think we'd now like to hear from Professor Chris Brady, who's the Chief Intelligence Officer at Sportsology and formerly Management Studies at Salford University. He talked about his varied life, but I know he's an expert in this area as well, and we'll be very interested to hear from Professor Chris Brady. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm not quite sure. I suppose when Les asked me to do this, I was a bit like yourself, Brendan. I couldn't quite work out what I was supposed to be in, why I was asked, especially as everybody else is well known. But so I tried to make up to see where I fitted in. And the two bits of research I'm working on at the moment, one is on the well-being side and deals very much with the question that Alan was bringing up about identity and its role in how people perceive themselves when they finished at the elite level sports. And the other area that I'm working on, which fits in, I think, with something that Scott was talking about, is I'm working with the guys at Google who are running, we're running a project on the role of artificial intelligence in sports in the future. And so the way in which they can actually enhance the health component, so what we're looking at is how machine human interface can actually enhance physical health as opposed to being some sort of enemy of physical health because everybody sat behind computers and so on and so forth. So they're the two areas that are quite interesting to me. But the research itself, I think the reason this research is really interesting and really valuable is because, like all good research, every time there's a finding or a conclusion, it opens up another 27 questions. So I know we've only got 5 minutes here, but I've got about 15 pages of notes that I made when I read the report. So in a way, I wish I hadn't read the report beforehand. I maybe only have 1 or 2 questions. But I think that last thing that Scott said, I think, and I wasn't going to mention this, but it goes back to somebody being older, Brendan, and you may remember this, is that in the very early 70s, I moved to Harlow, which was a new town at the time, and a very socialist oriented town. And my kids were like 4 or 5 years old at the time. And at Harlow Sports Centre, which was the biggest sports centre in Europe at the time, and a really innovative sports centre, quite, as I say, in a quite socialist town, had a thing called the Under 10s Club, which had gymnastics, running, everything in there. And admittedly, it was a babysitting exercise for us as the parents, but you could dump your kids there at 8 o'clock in the morning every Saturday and Sunday and not see them again until 6 o'clock at night. And coaches were talking after, and they were doing trampoline and everything, but they were doing a breadth of sports. And I think one of the things that this research says is, I think Les uses the term, this is just the start and the first step in a whole load of other research. And what I would like to see is the research that looks at people taking part in a breadth of sports when they were younger, as we did. So, we played football in the winter, we played cricket in the summer, we did athletics at springtime, and that was about it. And then as we grew older, so I was a schoolboy county tennis player. I later played squash for the county, but I was a semi-professional footballer. I actually played at Alva Church for Alan's benefit. Obviously, Alan, it was a league below. I was in the Premier League of the Southern League at the time, so it was a drop down for me, Alan. You'll appreciate that. And so I sort of just played sport. Just give me a sport. My wife always laughs at the joke that I made. I joined a company called British Aluminium and came out to my wife at the time, and she said, "How did the interview go?" I said, "Brilliant." I said, "I've got the job." She said, "What is it?" I said, "I'm not quite sure what the job is, but they've got a club that does this thing called squash, and I've never played that before. I'll have a go at that now." And so my life was about that. It was about how I could fit my life around sport. I would never take a job at Saturday and Sunday, we had to work Saturday and Sunday. So I think there's an element of this research that needs to go into that area, because as sports are getting more and more, what the research is showing, the sports are getting more and more focused. Children are getting more and more focused on single sports earlier and earlier. And I'm not sure that's whether a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. I was interested in the football thing when Alan was talking about the football thing, and I looked at the dip in 1970, and Alan will probably realise this. I know he was only 8 or 9 then, but in 1970, there was a dip in 1970. And I think Les should look at the 1970 Cup final and replay between Leeds and Chelsea, when you were lucky to survive the games, let alone live into a long era. So I think Les needs to look at that. But the other thing that struck me about this Brett is that when I got to I think it was 73 or something like that, a couple of years ago, we had a school, somebody sorted out a school reunion for our class. And in those days at school, you'll all remember, the older people remember, there were like 48, 50 kids in the class. And about 38 people turned up at that reunion, still alive, still all looking quite healthy. And they were all the kids that did all the sports. We all recognised each other from all the sports. And so I think there may be something about, going back to Scott's point, about how we're getting people to get engaged in sports early on, whether it's through mass participation or whether it's through breadth of sports. I don't know. I don't think it's going to change. I think things are going to get more and more focused on individual sports and focusing on a specific sport. I don't think that's going to change, to be honest. But I think it's something that's worth looking at in terms of the research, in terms of longevity. And I think finally, I want to really talk about this identity thing that Alan's talking about. I just finished some work for the League Managers Association, which is looking at the evolution of management since it started over the last 150 years, basically. And one of the things you do look at is the way in which people like Bill Shankly, Alf Ramsey, and that, when they were denied their drug of choice, i.e. sport or football, in Alan's terms, they fell off the cliff. They mentally degraded very, very quickly. And that, what I'm fascinated by is, how is it that people, say like Alan or like myself, who seamlessly move away from not playing, suddenly, I had an injury at 29 and suddenly you're not playing. And to us, it wasn't a big issue. We were a bit upset at the time and missed our friends and that, but immediately moved on. What's the difference? What is it that's helping us do that and helping our and denying our colleagues and making our colleagues really suffer for this? And that's why I think, the comparisons as well, say between boxing and horse racing and say cricket, for example, where we know that cricket, for example, is one of the highest suicide rates against the natural population. What's that all about? Why is that? So I think, as I said, to start with, all good research opens up a lot more questions than it actually answers. And so well done, Les, getting us started on all this, and thanks everybody for paying attention if you were.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I think people were interested to hear about your football career, and we're also interested in your analysis of the research. So I think that was really good. I also think that you pointed at some really interesting ideas. I think the exploration of some of these areas is obviously the next step in the equation. So the final speaker, the last 5 minutes or 6 minutes or 7 minutes, however long it takes, Andy Moore, who's in charge of the national partnerships at Health and Sport England. So Andy, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brendan, and thank you for inviting me here today to speak as part of this panel. It's really great to see this research affirming the contribution of sport in living longer. At Sport England, we really believe that everyone should have the opportunity to play sport, move more, and enjoy an active life. And so we really welcome this research that strengthens the case for participation in sport and physical activity across the life course, across all of our lives. And I think while very few of us will get the opportunity to play at Wembley, play on centre court, go and compete at an Olympics or a Paralympics, although there's definitely a few of us on the panel that applies to and a few that it doesn't, we can really get a lot of the health benefits that all of those elite level players do from just enjoying an active life, and they are long-lasting health benefits as well. So we're really pleased to see this building the evidence base and sort of strengthening that public narrative around the importance of sport and physical activity to healthy aging and to a long and I think importantly a good quality of life as well, because many of us are living longer but not necessarily with the best health, with the best quality of life, and sport and physical activity can really play a strong role there in improving our quality of life. So we hope that this research can encourage and strengthen collaboration between the sport and health sectors. And this collaboration is really vital. despite lots of wonderful initiatives, sporting organisations providing opportunities for a whole range of people to get active, typically it's those who are least active and who stand to serve and benefit the most from getting active that have the least opportunity and are in the poorest health. And our societal narratives do often reinforce this, that sport isn't for me, or that as you get older, you should slow down, that we can't enjoy the activities we used to. So it's really great to sort of see that strong evidence base between sport, physical activity and living longer. And that I think it's important to flag as well that whilst it is important to be active through the life course, even starting a bit later and getting active and just moving a little bit more can have huge health benefits. And I'm lucky enough at Sport England to kind of see this day in, day out through the partners we work with. Just last month, working with Age UK and the Football Association, they've worked with older audiences to co-design a walking football offer and really understand what it would take and what adaptations are needed to encourage people from lower incomes, people with health conditions or a disability to take part. And really the key thing they've done there is just make sure it's fun, accessible and sociable. And I think, as Alan mentioned, sort of when he retired, sort of losing those friendships that he had day in, day out, one of the key things that this program does is just put social opportunities at the heart of things and really sort of look to make sure that everyone is enjoying themselves. And certainly for me, over the last sort of 12 months during the pandemic, I'm a runner and I've been very fortunate that I've been able to keep doing what I love during the lockdown. But it has been so much more difficult and less rewarding taking part by yourself and not having those sort of opportunities to socialise, to run with your friends and just talk about running, which would bore my wife to death if I spent all the time I talk to running with my friends to her. And another great example that we've got, and I noticed a couple of the questions were about dementia, is we have a programme called Love to Move, which is run by British Gymnastics. And that brings carers and people with dementia together to get active through seated gymnastics. And what's wonderful there is it provides a bit of respite for the carer, a way to stay active for them so they can maintain their health, so that they can look after the person they're caring for. But also the individual with dementia taking part has seen huge benefits. Often it helps to slow the onset of dementia, improve cognitive sort of function. So quite often after taking part, they're a lot more sort of engaging and can perhaps sometimes remember more of the things in the short term and the long term that usually they wouldn't. And I guess the key thing about a lot of what we're seeing works to support people to get active is that they are co-designed with the audiences and really look to understand what those audiences need, want to get active. And I think I've probably had some of the points that I was going to make stolen by Tanny earlier, where she very eloquently made the case for physical activity. But the Chief Medical Officer's physical activity guidelines really do sort of show how sport and physical activity can be a miracle cure, how it can help offset and treat a range of health conditions, how it can provide the mobility, strength, flexibility to keep taking part in daily tasks and remain independent and retain your quality of life as you get older, and just being able to keep doing the things you enjoy for longer, see your friends, do the garden, be able to get on the bus, open a can, so that you can just retain that quality of life. And at a societal level, sport and physical activity can tackle dementia, poor mental health, loneliness, reduce the pressures on our wonderful NHS through reduced GP visits, hospital admissions, and just a few stats on that every year in active life is credited with reducing GP visits by 30 million, by preventing 900,000 cases of diabetes and 93,000 cases of dementia. And I believe pre-pandemic dementia was the largest cause of death in the UK. And I guess I'm sure today that I'm talking to the converted here in the role that sport and physical activity can play in quality of life and healthy aging. The benefits do last a lifetime, but they also, as I say, at a societal level, support the economy, can strengthen communities, build a stronger society for all, provide prevention for the NHS rather than having to sort of react to poor health. And the last thing I really wanted to talk about was just how we can help sport and physical activity to play an even greater role there, and how it can work more and more with health. There are significant inequalities in people's participation levels that existed pre-pandemic and has only been exacerbated. So you're disproportionately more likely, often twice as likely, to be inactive if you are a disabled person, if you have a health condition, and as you get older, particularly as you go into the sort of 75 plus category, and even perhaps to a lesser extent, but still significant inequalities exist for ethnic minorities, for women versus men in participation levels. And there's lots of great and wonderful projects, sports, activities, community organisations working to address that, but they still do remain. So at Sport England, we're looking to really strengthen those collaborations between sport, physical activity and health to address this at a national level. And some of the things we're doing that I just wanted to sort of raise awareness of, there's a wonderful programme that is led by healthcare professionals to really give GPs, pharmacists, other healthcare professionals the confidence, competence and tools to have conversations with their patients about physical activity. And one example that you see there is that I think over 1,500 GP practices are registered as parkrun prescribers. So essentially they recommend and encourage and support their patients to go along to a parkrun. That can be in a participant level, but also can be volunteering. And you still get huge benefits from volunteering around sport and physical activity as well as taking part. There's campaigns such as This Girl Can, which is focused on supporting women to feel sport is for them. We Are Undefeatable, which is led by a range of health condition charities that makes sport and physical activity relevant to people with health conditions, and that it can be fun for them, relevant to them, accessible to them. And also working with a range of different sports, community clubs, organisations to help them understand the diversity of our motivations, our capabilities, our interests, particularly as we get older. And Tanya again talked about some of the work UK Active are doing to really understand how the leisure sector can support older audiences to get active and provide a real breadth of opportunity. Well, for some team sports will be the way people want to get active. For others, it will be by themselves in indoor settings, outdoor settings. So just having a real diversity of offers there, so there's something for everyone, is really important to us. So to conclude, I just really wanted to share the panel and Tanya's aspiration that this can be a platform for us to sort of change the public narrative about sport and physical activity and its importance in maintaining your health, maintaining your independence as you get older. And you don't have to assume that getting older means slowing down. And then yes, sort of a real call to action that we use it as a platform to collaborate even more around the health sector, insurance sector, physical activity sector, to understand how we can motivate, encourage and support people to get active in ways that work for them. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back to Brendan.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy. That was a really quick and comprehensive overview of the lots of activities that are going on in Sport England, particularly in your area of partnerships. So thank you for that. I think we've now got to tackle some really interesting questions that have been prompted by Les's research, but also being widened significantly by the various contributors. So I think the first question that people would like to address, and I think is really interesting: to what extent do the outcomes for sporting legends apply to people who engage in non-competitive physical activity? So maybe Andy, you could pick that one up quickly.
Thanks, Brendan. Well, I guess as sort of Les highlighted with this research, there is a gap, and still is a gap really, around the role that sport and physical activity can play in longevity. But there is a really strong evidence base for the benefits sport and physical activity, even just a little bit, as little as sort of 10 minutes across the week, 30 minutes across the week, can have real benefits all the way through your life, for sort of improving your strength and your bones as you're young, sort of all the way through to maintaining your flexibility, your ability to be independent as you get older, preventing cognitive decline in some cases as well. So there are huge benefits to getting active throughout your life course. What we probably don't know, and what this has started to fill in the gap, is sort of that longevity study. A lot of the benefits can be quite soon, which I think is wonderful, because I think that sends a message that just because you haven't done so much up till now, there's still the opportunity to get active, find things that are for you, and you can get huge benefits right now in helping to manage health conditions, improve your health, and just live a long and good quality of life.
Thank you. Has anyone else got a view on that interesting topic? They must have left, the rest of them must have left the arena. Let me move on from there, because I think there's another interesting area. It says, what targeted tax incentives work best at encouraging healthier lifestyles whilst addressing cultural barriers? And I think, Scott Reed, that would be an interesting one for you to look at, wouldn't it?
Yeah, just to make sure I understand the question. So what tax incentives did you say?
What targeted tax incentives work best at encouraging healthier lifestyles? I think you can extend it beyond tax incentives into incentives, really, can't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think incentives, yeah, I think this is a really key question, because, I mean, everybody knows, I think it's just all habit forming and habit building. I mean, I know, because I do running, but it's because I do it every day. You just get into the habit and you just do it. But I do know it's all about, some people are self-motivated and some people aren't, and some people they need different techniques to motivate them to do it, to take part. So some people, I think, what might help with the general population, so I think these mass participation events are good, because I think that does encourage people to, because it's more of a social event, they can turn up and it's not maybe too competitive, and they can just enjoy, like the park runs, I think is a good thing. I think that sort of event can help people, so give them incentives to take part. So I would say it's really a sort of a mix of different things for different people. I think actually sometimes it's funny. I think with gyms and things, I remember I joined a gym a while ago, and there's incentives. You got like half your gym price discount if you did so many different activities or something like that. And I think that was quite good. It was quite funny, because I think financial incentives do help as well. But I think it's just really just whatever works. I don't know. It's just trying to encourage people to do different things in different ways. And I think that's the key thing.
We've got a comment from David Sinclair saying, one tax incentive could be extending cycle to work incentives to all ages, people who want to work, etc., retirees. Interesting point.
Yeah, I think that there is quite a few like employee schemes which they do offer incentives for cycling to work, but again, it depends exactly where you are and if that's possible to do or not. I think that's a good incentive. I think a lot of companies do that. I think it's a really good way to get people more active. And so instead of using a car, you can use a bike. I think that's a great incentive to do that. Yeah. There's
an interesting question on here saying about the recent research about dementia. Alan Smith, have you got any further thoughts on that? Because you did touch on it in your presentation.
No, I mean, it's going to be a long-standing survey, Brendan. I think across maybe 3 years, I get a little set of cognitive tests sent to me about every 3 months. I've got one in my inbox waiting for me. So I suppose they're looking at all these people that are testing over a longer period of time. There's more money being put into it. The PFA, the Players Union, have had to be nudged a little bit from outside to get their act in order. And it's almost been something that they've wanted to brush under the carpet. And I mentioned the NFL, and it was certainly the case in the States, I think, something that the authorities didn't want to admit, that there was a link between brain injury and the sport, because it'd have all sorts of ramifications. And and I think it will in football, and we're seeing those already, as I mentioned, with under 14s. I think it is, don't head the ball in training. But they haven't come to any firm conclusions yet, Brendan. That's probably a few years down the line, but thankfully, we are looking into it, and it's certainly needed looking into.
Sorry to interrupt you, Alan, but there's clearly an issue here. I remember that Alan Shearer documentary, and I remember people like yourself having talked about it very recently. Whose responsibility is to take hold of tackling the problem?
Well, that's been it, isn't it? I mean, listen, the FA, they're the overriding body in this country. They're kind of supposedly in charge of football. You would imagine they would take the lead, and the PFA as well as the players' union. Their job is to look after the welfare of the members. So they're another one. So it's a joint effort, I think. As I say, at the moment, or in the past, everyone's been shuffling about and probably a bit reluctant to go into it in any depth. But we've come to the tipping point now, I think, where it has to be done, and it is being done. And
would it be fair to say it seems like it is a real issue now?
I think so, yeah. I mean, you might have read about Jeff Astle, the West Bromwich Albion centre forward. His family, they've really been pushing it because, in the post-mortem on Jeff, there was found to be a serious brain injury. And ever since that day, he died a few years ago now, they've been pushing and pushing against a shut door, actually, on many occasions. So, fair play to them for the persistence. And as I say, things are moving along. And eventually we will find out.
How does it make a player like you, who were a prominent centre forward? How does it make you feel when you see, personally, when you see that research and you hear about the 66 team? You probably saw that documentary about Jack Charlton.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you for a bare your soul, but how does it make you feel, Alan?
Well, worried, I suppose. Given, as I said earlier, my game was quite a lot about heading. I'm 6'3". I was a centre forward. The keeper would kick it up. I'd flick it on. I was attacking crosses. And we practiced that technique in training. Our manager at the time at Arsenal, George Graham, was a great header of the ball, and he used to take me through his techniques. I mean, that shouldn't be lost to football, but you do feel worried, and you've got to be concerned for future generations, haven't you? And for parents sending their kids out to play football. I know a lot of parents are shying away from getting the kids involved in rugby for the health connotations, for the injuries that are involved in that sport as the kids get bigger and more powerful, because it is such a powerful sport, isn't it now, rugby? So it is. I mean, listen, there's nothing I can do about it now. Whatever's going to happen will happen, but it does make you think.
Well, I'll tell you what. Honestly, Alan, that's a really it's really good of you to share that thought, because I think when something like this, when it becomes a study and it suddenly hits home, and then a person who is clearly involved in the front line, literally, for Arsenal scoring against Newcastle, I remember, but that's
many times, Brendan.
I remember one of them, but I'm not going to tell you about that one. But never mind. But you actually, share your thoughts on it, I think makes a theoretical study become real. So thanks very much for that. Does Professor Chris Brady, have you got anything to say on that? Chris, you were obviously a footballer yourself.
I think there's a real difficulty here, and Alan sort of touched upon it by saying, yes, we need to worry about the concussion protocols, for example, but we don't want to lose heading from football. Well, if we're not going to lose heading from football, I want my players to practice it. So there's a slight contradiction there. And what's happening in the US with the American football is that when you get past 6 years old in the US, the sport training goes in two different directions. One goes in the direction of what they call tackle football, and the other goes in the direction of what they call flag football, where you have a flag attached to you, and when you take the flag off, that effectively is a tackle. And the participation in tackle football is declining rapidly in American football. Now, if you're the NFL, that should be quite worrying to you in the long term, because if people are not playing at all, then you're not going to get people coming through and so on. So you've got this continuous conflict between the health of the business and the health of the individuals playing it, and it's quite difficult. And I think there's one other thing is that many years ago, and you may have seen this, Brendan, we're around about the same age, but it was about 20 years ago, there was a quite extensive bit of research with Olympic athletes, aspirational Olympic athletes. And it basically sort of said to them, and I can't remember the exact details of the research, but it basically said to them, if we guaranteed you a gold medal, but it was take 5 years off your life, would you take it? And something like 67% of them said, absolutely, didn't even bat an eyelid. You know, so you've got that issue as well. As Alan said, when he was 18 practicing heading with George Graham or whatever, he wasn't thinking about whether he's going to live to 78 or 79. He was just obsessed with the sport. And that's the issue that we've got. The great thing from, say, Andy's point of view is that we've got this fantastic thing that everybody wants to play, you know, to a certain extent. I know we're trying to get participation levels up, but those people that get involved in it are obsessed with it. So I think we've got some interesting times to go. If we start to ban heading in the game, it will fundamentally change the structure of the game, which has already changed quite a lot from the sort of more, you know, the more confrontational, the more conflict that used to be in football, well, especially in my day, but definitely even in Alan's day.
I don't think they're good. Sorry, Brendan, I'm just going to say, I mean, I don't think, you know, heading will go out of football, but and yes, you have got to practice it, but there's the awareness not to, you know, we used to serve balls up to the centre halves and they would come and try and head it as high and as far as possible. So just to restrict that practice, and in a match, you'll just carry on as normal. But I don't know, I haven't seen any research, but you see so many games now where there aren't as many crosses. You know, look at Man City, they get to the byline and cut a low ball across. So football is changing all the time, but I think you can still retain heading in the game without having to have those repetitive drills where you've come off the training pitch and you've got a headache, which, you know, I did a few times when I've caught the ball wrong. So there's just that awareness, I think, that can help.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Brendan, I think the protocol, Alan's right, the protocols that are in place now where we can have substitutions for potential concussion and so on, they're all going to help. And Alan's also right, the games change and we have to accept those changes within the games.
Thanks very much. I think there's an interesting question here from Robert Dick saying, would you expect the findings that Professor Les has produced today for casual amateur participants to be similar to professional sportsmen? So you know, is tennis for the amateur the panacea, like it looks like it is for extending a healthy life here? Les, do you want to speak on that subject?
Yeah, I do. I think it's very important. It's not only your personal longevity, but it's, you know, how long you can play the sport that you are wedded to. And clearly, sports like tennis and golf, you can go on to very venerable ages. And I would also emphasise other aspects, the sociability of those sports. They're often mixed gender. Which I think also makes a difference, and consequently the culture and the dialogue, you know, between participants is very different from the dialogue that you would get in after a rugby match, for example. So I think they're pretty important characteristics. The other thing I'm hoping, and I think this talks to Andy and to Tanya as well, which is the influence that sporting legends have, and especially the historical context in which I've based this research, which is this is hugely influential. And I worry, I don't know whether you know this, but the ONS does time surveys of how people use their time. And if you don't use it playing sport, you use it in some other way. And I think a lot of sport today is what I would call standing and staring, or sitting down on a couch and looking at television or your mobile phone endlessly. And I think if sport can be a way out of that problem, but perhaps we don't emphasize it enough and need to emphasize it more. Sometimes these messages fall on what often called, the willing, and not on the ones who really need to take note of these things. And I think getting that message across to those who are not participating in sport but should participate in sport is really quite an important issue.
If I just, can I just, this research and this document of work you've produced, Professor Les, is a terrific opening. And I would say it begs the question, and I would like a quick answer, a very reasonably quick answer. Does the world agree, or does the UK agree, that active sport, taking part in active sport, it can extend and lead to a longer life? Is that, is it a given? Have we proved that? Can we prove that? Is that something everybody assumes, or do we assume it? Does active sport lead to a longer life?
I think the answer is conclusive there. Yes, it does. Obviously, it depends on the type of sport that you're engaged with, and there's plenty of other research, not my research, out there, which is based on very large samples of people currently alive. I'm thinking of the Copenhagen study and others, which show pretty conclusively that health is improved and longevity is improved. But they don't quite do it in this very long historical context that I've done it, which I think actually strengthens the case for it as well. And it also opens up all these other avenues and questions that we've been referring to and talking about. So okay. Yes, it's the answer. Yeah.
Okay, and Andy, what would your answer be to that question? Does
I'd agree with Les. Yes, I think the challenge is that whilst that's broadly known, knowing that sport and physical activity is good for your health doesn't change everyone's behaviour. That doesn't necessarily make it easy for you to maintain an active habit. So I think, to Les's point around it's how we can find ways to support people to make physical activity a priority, that show them it can be fun, that it can boost your immediate mood, your energy levels, your sleep, your well-being, can be sociable, and find ways that it can fit in people's lives. But equally, we do have to recognise that lots of people have challenging lives. If you've got food poverty, then physical activity isn't going to be a priority. So Sport England are looking to work with a whole range of organisations to address some of those major big issues as well, and tackle inequalities so that people can see the role sport can play.
There's a view that the opportunities to participate in sport have declined because of closures of football pitches and leisure centres in financial difficulty, or the high cost of membership of a gym and all those sorts of things. And there is a concern, and this goes back to Chris's point about socialist Harlow, where everything was there for you on a plate, and the question, is it there for you on a plate to the same extent today? I'm not really qualified to say, but my impression is that it's more difficult.
Well, can I just move that same question onto Alan Smith? Alan, do you believe that? Hello?
You're on mute, Al.
Yeah. Sorry, mate. Yeah, sorry. Do I believe what?
Do you believe that an active sport can lead to a longer life?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a layman, it would seem an obvious answer that it would do, wouldn't it? You get your heart pumping, your lungs working. It's got to make you healthier, keep the weight off, and from a mental aspect as well. I mean, in releases endorphins and all the rest of it. We all feel good, don't we? After a session, we're sweating, out of breath, whatever, and you just feel alive. So
yeah.
I think it's got to do everybody good, no matter what level that they're playing at. And Yeah, and I do think it's maybe harder to get involved now, as Chris said, and schools, you know, they offered so much school sports back in the day, and the selling of playing fields and what have you. It seems to have narrowed the amount of hours in a week that schools provide for PE and everything, and that's something definitely to look at.
Okay, what about Scott? Have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I agree with the panel on this one. I suppose just a different angle is that, you know, quite often there's quite bad publicity if somebody sort of dies during a marathon or something, and it catches the newspapers, and people get the impression, well, actually, maybe running isn't so good for you. So I think this is why I was thinking about, you know, research into endurance type sports and things like that. I think would be really useful. But generally speaking, yeah, I agree that keeping fit and active over your lifetime, I think, is a massive benefit for you. I think mentally as well as physically.
Well, if you look at a significant point, then if we really believe, if we could prove that activity and regular activity, sporting and participatory, you know, exercise, does lead to a longer life, then surely that would be the research that we should all head towards. Because if you could prove that, because I don't, everyone said, well, I assume so, but Les has demonstrated that with elite sport, he's got some real evidence that elite sport leads to a longer life in certain sports. We haven't got the equivalent research that says activity, daily activity or regular activity for the general public leads to a longer, healthier life. And I think, from my point of view, I think that would be another step or a next step in a comprehensive piece of work from people like Les and your cohorts, Les.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've probably got to separate things out a bit here in terms of what we are, what we mean by that. So I think Alan was talking about earlier how difficult it was in some sports to transition from your career into later life, and that transition, you know, it seems to be a fork in the road. You can either take the, you know, the gambling path or the good life, however you want to define it, and that raises issues of mental health and conditioning on what you do in your later career. So I suppose I'm arguing for a life course kind of approach here, and looking at the different stages of life, how you get people into sport, how you wean them off sport when their career's over, and you give them some, they find something useful and healthy to do, perhaps changing and adopting a different sport, to golf, as many people do, or tennis. So it's really a lifelong life course issue, how to remain active and healthy over your life. And then I think you reap the benefits of the most benefits of the additional longevity that we're talking about.
Anybody else got a view on that, what Les has said?
Yeah,
it's all pretty obvious stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to make a point. I think, yeah, I'm quite keen, obviously, to do quite a lot of running. Is that I think it would be great to do, and I think marathon running's one of these old, ancient, traditional sports going way back. I think the problem is getting the data, but I think that it'd be great to do elite people as well as you know, amateur runners that have done that throughout their lifetime. I think that would be really useful, because that's such a, that would just be, yeah, I think that would be really useful if we're able to get.
I'd say that if any of our discussants today could help us with, you know, data that gives us these perspectives and helps address these questions, we'd be very open to listening to that. And I suppose equally also, Scott, some of the insurance data that you have, because you obviously price people and take into account their lifestyles and other habits, which would inform this debate as well.
Yeah, I think this is something that's building up over time as we get more data. But as you know, Les, we need data over quite a long period of time. And if it's anything to do with mortality, you need to collect a lot of data over a long time to give you to see things happening. But I think that is going to happen. But I think at the moment there just isn't the data. The data hasn't been collected. It's not really been there. You don't tend to collect people's activity, as policyholders. But that's changing though. But again, it'll still take you quite a lot of time to get the evidence. But I do know other people do have data sets like different wearable watches. There's different groups have got data sets that could be used, that could provide some insights into this.
Is it all about data? Is that the key, is it?
I think for mortality it is, and I think it's, well, this is why it's interesting, Liz, the research in survivorship, because I think you don't have to wait 150 years to get enough data. I think you can do, if you can do it over, perhaps you can have a shorter lifetime and it could give you a bit more information. I think that would be useful in survivorship to look at that angle.
Can I agree with you there, Scott? Because I think just knowing that this subgroup of the population is out surviving the general population is information that's useful, because you don't have to know whether they're dead or not, and you can actually do that kind of research with people that are currently alive, and that could address the dementia issue. You don't have to wait until people are dead, and you can apply it to small groups. You can apply it to specific characteristics or attributes of the population that you're studying. So that might well be the way to overcome this problem, that you don't have the long-term historical record for everybody.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're coming towards the end here. Les, do you want to just sum up A, your project, and B, the reaction to it?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, I could sit and listen to this all night. I think it's been really, really interesting, and all the different perspectives, some fantastic insights and contributions. Exactly what I was hoping, really. I would also say that I really enjoyed doing this research. Don't ask me how I got the idea. I could tell you, but that would take a few hours. But anyway, I did, and I really enjoyed developing this methodology, because it's wider application to other sports and to society in general. So I really hope to continue with it one way or another. The messages that it creates are really important. I do think that sporting legends influence all of us in one way or another. We all aspire and wish we were someone like Alan, England centre forward, or whatever it happens to be, or a Wimbledon finalist. I think all those things matter to people, and they use them, they log them in their brains, and they take lessons from that, and they adapt their behaviours as well. So sport is good for your physical fitness, but I think it's also very good, as we've heard, for your mental fitness as well. And also, the longer that you can keep doing it, obviously the better it will be. I think that's exemplified by the fact that you get these tennis players who are well into their 80s and still playing, and equally with golfers too. So transitioning from your core sport into another sport later in life is good as well. I'll leave it there, Brendan. I don't really.
Okay, I'll just like a quick couple of words from Alan, who's the only low point of my afternoon is when he reminded me how often we used to score against Newcastle United.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure taking part in this. It does make you think. I think we're all people that love sport and love taking part. Of course, there are some people that hate sport and they actually hate physical exercise, don't they? So kind of persuading them to change their habits would be practically impossible. But I think, you know, the more we encourage people to go out there and do something, get into it, the better. But, you know, congratulations to Les and all his colleagues for undertaking this, because it's revealing, isn't it? And it can do a lot of good, I think, in terms of encouragement.
Thank you very much, Alan. Scott, do you want to say a few words just in response to those other comments?
Yeah, just wanted to say, yeah, it's great to be part of this panel, because I'm obviously keen in sports, and it's from a professional point of view as well. I think this is such an important topic. So yeah, I think what Les's papers, you know, really, you know, I think it does open up. Yeah, sort of agreeing with Professor Chris in terms of the questions. It just raises a lot more questions and further research. But I think it's great to get involved in this and looking at different sports as well, and a range of different sports.
Smashing. Thanks, Scott. Chris Brady, do you want to say a few eloquent words to finish?
No, just to give you some advice as a chairman, Brendan. I can't believe you got away with asking two actuaries whether it was all about data, and we were actually getting off. When you asked that question, I nearly dropped off, because I thought we're going to be here for 3 or 4 hours now.
And Andy, do you want to say a few words to finish?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I think for me, it's great that this is contributing to the evidence base. And as I said, the Chief Medical Officer has already referred to physical activity as a miracle cure for your health. So I think it's a real opportunity to all work together to broaden the appeal of sports, so that they're relevant, accessible, and fun and engaging for all of us, not just those of us who sort of currently love them. So particularly with the pandemic, and how lots of team sports have not been able to take place for the last 12 months in their usual shape and form, just all working together to get them back as quickly and strongly as possible, and that they can be relevant to the younger generation as well as to older audiences as well.
Smashing, thank you very much. Interesting, you mentioned the Chief Medical Officer. He's the one we see on the telly every night. Is he the head of the pandemic as well? That's him as well, is it?
Yeah, they have multiple roles.
Well, I think just to summarise, I think we've had a really interesting discussion. I think Les's paper is very, very, very good indeed. I think some of the doors that it opens for further studies is exciting, and I look forward to hearing from you all in the future. And thank you very much indeed. And my only qualification for being here is that I'm old. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Brendan. Thank you, everybody else. It's been great.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye there.
All right. Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Bye there.